Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. The topic of contraception runs with the concept of Catholicism like a wink and a nod, like a wink that's opposed to a nod, if a wink were opposed to a nod. Everyone knows that Catholics do not and cannot contracept, such that a common scene behind a Tridentine Latin Mass among younger than 40-year-old Catholics will occasion the following. One head of household after Mass over donuts arguing with another head of household. Hey, is 6 kids enough? 8? 10? Very, very frequently held discussion. I don't mean the exact number of kids, but all of us Catholics who take the faith seriously understand well that we're not allowed to artificially contracept. What this means is that we're constantly questioning what the ceiling on this moral theological hard line is. What should the ceiling be? How many kids should a family occasion? And of course, both fathers arguing after the TLM Mass on a Sunday over donuts will always concede that there's no magic number. It's not a precept of the faith that every Catholic has to have 12.5 children or anything like that. And yet, even though they give this perfunctory concession, half-hearted concession, they argue in person, I've seen it many times, and online, particularly on places like Twitter or Reddit, until the cows come home. So what's the deal? How many children should a faithful Catholic household have? Here's the catch. I'm not going to answer this question for you guys today. I'm not. The catch is this. People that are my age, that are a little bit older, young Gen Xers, I'm a kind of cusper millennial. Folks that are a little bit younger, cuspers between millennial and Zoomers, all the ones that are having kids at this point, seem to be committed to a worldview of no artificial contraception, which is really all the church requires. And this means if they get married young, the way we all know is advisable, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, sky's the limit for the family size, Jim Bob Duggar, right? So it's a silly argument to have, particularly when, here's the catch for today's show. If you ask most of these trads who didn't come from a super traditional household, who didn't come from a society household or a fraternity household, SSPX or FSSP, the majority of them will admit freely, under their breath, that if you ask them, how many siblings did you have, man? Let's use your own family for guidance. 1, 0, some of them are only children. 2, 1, 2, 2, 0. These are the answers you're going to get. Maybe 3 siblings. Before trads contend with any sort of meaningfulness to proper family size, they need to consider the discussion that I'm going to queue up in today's episode of Rules for Retrogrades, which is not actually dialogue because it's a monologue. But before you can tend to any kind of meaningful treatment of the topic, what's the ideal family size, which truly one size doesn't fit all, it should be noted, we have to address the fact that most of us are from 0 or 1 or 2 sibling households. It's you, 1 or 2 others, in some cases 0 others. I know lots of folks in the comm box are actually from households, from the few minority jurisdiction households that did it right. You probably went to the Latin Mass growing up. You're probably homeschooled even in the 90s or early 2000s before it was trendy. Great. Well, most of us weren't. Most of us were not raised with the TLM. We had to find it somewhere in our 20s. Like I did. I found it a little before Summorum Pontificum came out, right after I'd been married. Great. I learned through trial and error that this is best. I learned not through trial, but I learned through seeing the way the world went that homeschooling was best. Well, we didn't pick it up from our family of origin. So if you're one of those folks out there, parish orphans, retrogrades, hat tip to you, whose parents were venerable, awesome boomers who did homeschool you, give you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, other siblings, who did take you the Tridentine Latin Mass. God bless you. Go take a moment today, place a direct call or at least a text to your parents and say, thank you. You guys were the real ballers, particularly among boomers. This is just rare. God bless those parents. But it's not the norm, okay? So you don't need to comment if this was you, because we don't like disproportionate comebacks. You can, but most folks were in my case, right? 2 siblings or less. That's what we're going to tend to today. Before you can argue what the remedy is for so many social ills, to say nothing of patriarchy, which I'm going to intentionally leave out of today's show. I've been talking about it a lot lately because the wider culture has been talking about it. I'm not going to address whether or not there's feminism between among your parents. I'm just addressing family size. And before you can get into a meaningful argument over whether 6 kids, 7 kids, 8, 9, 10 is what's best, all of those families who are having kids every 1.5 to 2.5 years during the birthing years of the mother, they're all probably avoiding artificial contraception, which is really the only rule for us Catholics. And it's a big one. But yeah, I know you guys want to get into, discussions of what you call NFP. That conversation is absolutely bereft of meaning without adverting to Thomistic Aristotelian action theory, which is the real guidance that the church gives. So NFP is not, it's a neologism. It's silly. It's silly to worry about it as long as you're not artificially contracepting and you've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kids. You have to be willing to address your parents and your family of origin. That's what I'm advising today. If you've got 0, 1, 2 siblings, you do it lovingly, but I'm going to talk about how and why, more importantly, why in today's show. So stay tuned for that. The family of origin that you come from or I come from, unless it's really traditional, it probably suffered from a contraceptive mindset. A contraceptive mindset is something that I am going to describe in this episode as reverse abortion. In today's show, we'll get into why I call it that and what that is. And it's something that needs to be addressed between you and your parents. First, though, I want to remind every one of you that as creepy news starts to leak out again as we go back into the fall and what will, I'm sure, be some sort of dark winter in this last full bout of Bidenism, that you need to get out of your blue state and get to a red state. I suggest the blood red swath of states from Texas to Florida. I've done this road trip several times in the 3 years that I've now lived here in Mississippi. We're about to do it again, and it's beautiful driving across the Southeast. realestateforlife.org will help you do that. If you think that this is one of those throwaway slogans or throwaway adverts or throwaway hat tips, you're wrong. If you're a conservative, a Catholic, a trad, whatever, and you live in a blue state, get the hell out. realestateforlife.org will help you do it. And I know because tons of successful stories are made there every day. People go to www.realestateforlife.org. Do it now before the end of 2023. Get the process underway. More bad stuff is coming. You're going to be reminded of things that happened 3 to 4 years ago. I can almost guarantee you that. I don't know if it'll happen in early 2024 or late 2024, early 2025, but it's on its way. There's already saber rattling in the news. And it's going to be worse. You need to be in a good republic, by which I mean a red state. Importantly also, if you're a relatively young person and you watch this, or more to the point, a single person, even if you're not super young, even if you're 30 or 35, check out www.return.us, RETVRN.us, where there's a one-of-a-kind product offered by myself and Will Noland and a boy genius behind the company, Return Matchmaking. We are making matches every week between young to young middle-aged Catholic singles who didn't think it was realistic previously to find someone because the sweet old lady at their parish, their fathers mostly, and the Catholic dating services failed them. Mainly their fathers, though. Fathers, sweet old ladies of the parish, friends who tried to set them up, CatholicMatch.com, all failed them, and they're beginning to give up on love as young as 30 years old. Not super young, but too young to give up. Go to www.return.us, RETVRN.us. It's a one-of-a-kind service where we make matches from a bird's eye view. We're the shot clock way above the game. www.return.us, RETVRN.us. Finally, please support this channel. Go to timothyjgordon.com. You can donate. That supports me, the man. Lots of arrows flying my way. That's a private donation. If you want to support the channel, go to the Locals or Subscribe Star link on this vid. Okay. Catholicism and contraception. Well-known bête noirs, one with respect to the others. People know this. If you're a Catholic, your Protestant friends will say, oh, you guys don't have artificial contraception. Correct. Righto. That's absolutely correct. We don't. We can't. And it's categorical. It's absolutely categorical. Pope Francis, in February of 2016, said it's not, but he's wrong. That's a Francis issue. Put that in a box. February 2016, he said you could use condoms in the case of Zika virus. Well, he's wrong. And he hasn't really repeated the teaching aside from a few vague insinuations. For 2,000 years, it's been utterly clear. No onanism, no artificial devices as contraceptions, no chemical devices as artificial contraception. And yet, and trads know this, if you're 45 or 35 or 25 and watching this show, you get it. All of us know. If you're watching this show, you know. No artificial contraception. It's basic. And yet, there's this darkling secret that all of us dare not address. We tiptoe around it every day. How many siblings do you have? How many do you have? Okay, the people in the comment box are like, I have 8. Okay, I know there's a few people in my audience that were blessed enough to have come from a household, a family of origin, which did things the right way. You are in the vast minority. And the vast majority of those, even faithful Catholics that are using their families of origin as not examples, but cautionary examples, cautionary tales, what not to do. That's the 80, 85, 90% of you in the audience. Most of you do not have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 brothers or sisters. Family of origin, as I know, and those people I just addressed know, had a contraceptive mindset. I'm going to explain in today's show why I call this reverse abortion. The contraceptive mindset makes families get aborted. What I mean by families is the ability to interact one with another interpersonally, successfully, fluidly, in the adulthood of the offspring. That has been aborted in the generations since contraception became so widespread. When did contraception become so widespread, even among Catholics? Well, several 20th century generations viewed marriage as about spousal fellow feeling more than being about procreation. And that's where it began. And so this generation, ironically named, began after World War II. Like everything bad in this country, World War II is an inflection point. Even some of the younger greatest generation the parents above the baby boomers, began believing in contraceptive devices. I'll never forget, I had an older family member from that generation that asked my mom, well, why not do things the technological way in terms of having a family? It wasn't specifically about procreation, contraception. It was about something related. I won't say what. And it just began to reflect in American society a technocratic perspective. Why not use techne over phusis? Why not use technological tinkering over natural biological processes like having big families, which human beings have done since time immemorial? So this began even with the younger of Greatest Generation, but most of the Greatest Generation still had large families, which is why the baby boomers, those born between 1947 and 1963, some say 1946 and 1963, were called the baby boomers because a lot of them had many, many siblings, which was ubiquitous in basically all generations previous to that. Unless someone 100, 200, 300 years before lived in the time of a great plague when a bunch of babies died. That's different, having a dead sibling, than contracepted siblings in potency. You understand? So the baby boomers, even though they're named for having lots of brothers and sisters, unless they're one of the minority households from younger Greatest Generation folks that did start contracepting, they were the first generation to really imbibe the contraceptive mindset. After them, Generation X, a mini generation shoved between, not as expansive by years of birth as the millennials or the baby boomers, shoved between them. We often forget about the Gen X, the direct kids of the baby boomers. Often because some charts count them only as a 14 or 15 year long generation. That's very odd. But they don't get hammered the way the boomers do. They get ignored. Then of course you have millennials, which is another expansive like 20-year generation by most counts. So you have boomers, Gen X, millennials, and now next up we have the Zoomers. After Zoomers, it goes to Generation Alpha. We'll see about them. But the Zoomers have begun having kids. And if we're talking Catholics, among these four generations, they, like millennials, are in the aftermath of the childbirthing crisis in America, in the West, and in even the Roman Catholic Church. So because several of these 20th century generations, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Zoomers, if they don't red pill, viewed marriage as about spousal fulfilling more than being about procreation, there was a birthing crisis. And that birthing crisis, yeah, we've talked about it a lot. Hungary addresses it a lot. Eastern Europe addresses it. And it's in the news, no small amount. That's not what today's show is about. Today's show is about why do most of us who have addressed our own generation and the generation above us, why do I have so few kids? Let me rephrase that. Why have so few of us addressed the generation above us? Why do I have so few brothers? I'm arguing with this guy in my generation, another fellow tradcath, at the Latin Mass over donuts and coffee over, what's the ideal amount of kids to have, 9 or 12? That's stupid, given that we haven't yet addressed the contraceptive mindset, the reverse abortion of our own generation perpetrated on us by the generation above. And I know there are people in my audience who are boomers who had 10 kids. God bless you guys. I love you guys. I want to describe a phenomenon. I was listening to a song, a hip hop song, showed to me by my friend Jordan, called "Lost Ones." Touching hip hop song about the conflagration, the absolute crisis among black Americans, where in places like New York City, like 2 out of 3 black babies are aborted, almost 2 out of 3. It's out of control demographically. It's spiked there. Too many abortions and all the other demographics, but no one else is comparable. A really touching treatment of it in a hip hop song called Lost Ones. Abortive parents will, as is sort of described in the song, or it's insinuated in the song, they've killed their child in womb, or several of their children in their womb, and they'll be at the park with a buddy or with a brother or a sister with their kids, and they'll see a 10-year-old playing at the park, swinging on the swings, and they'll be suddenly struck with absolute abomination of desolation, absolute missing of their aborted child. My child would have been 10 years old too. I see a 10 and an 8-year-old swinging together. My little nephews, these parents will say, well, I aborted 2 kids who are aged 10 and 8, 10 years ago, who would have been 10 and 8. This is what they'll say. I'm not speaking for myself. And they'll be just heart-struck. Can you imagine? I can't. But this song, Lost One, treats of the phenomenon in a really meaningful way, a poignant way that still represents a kind of boots-on-the-ground attitude. It's still very hip-hop. It struck me last night over dinner that what's happened to the contraceptive generations, to folks like me, whites who were raised out in the Novus Ordo churches out in the suburbs. My friends, aside from one friend who had 5 siblings, borderline trad, being one of 6, that's pretty legit, especially for being raised in the 90s. All my friends, 1 sibling, 2 siblings, at most 3, some of them none. Many of them none. 0, 1, 2. That is what struck us in the heart like a tranquilizer dart. Out in the suburbs, white kids, well-to-do kids, going to the Novus Ordo, being raised there. And guess what? Our households were struck by something called reverse abortion, which might sound good. I mean, I'm just making this term up anyway. It's reverse abortion because whereas many of the abortive parents will see a 10-year-old playing at the park, miss the aborted child, contraceptive families are plagued by adulthood feuding and incommunicado. Just reason with me for a second. Adult feud, and I don't mean you get in one fight, because all adults fight. Every great spousal couple, marital couple, fights every once in a while, a couple times a year. Feuding and incommunicado with your grown-up children with your grown-up parents, indicates the opposite of abortive regret, or can indicate the opposite of abortive regret, if it's endemic enough, if it's enough of a plague, especially if a family's out of touch with itself, one member with the other. It represents a sort of birthing regret. Think about it from the perspective of the wellspring, the parents who chose to plan their families and have only 2 kids, 3 kids. If I can pick and choose, I'm not talking about aborting anyone or killing them. I'm talking about killing them before they could come to life. If I could pick and choose, well, the minute one of my kids addresses something in me, or one kid seems to be causing more of a fight with the other, what use are they? Right? If you take a utilitarian approach to having a family, the point of the sacrament of matrimony, from the outset, you will have one 20 years, 30 years down the line, when your kids start having their own families. Junk in, junk out. The proof is in the pudding. What's the pudding? That so many families reach out to me and Steph. They're our age, or a little older, a little younger, and they say, I'm not talking to my brother, I'm not talking to my sister, I'm not talking to my parents, I'm not talking to anyone in my family. This is the direct downstream ramification of coming from a reverse abortion household, a contraceptive mindset household. If the wellspring can pick and choose not who to kill, but whom to avoid having in the first place, then what use are you the second you raise an inconvenient point? The test for this is a parsimony of love. Too little love in those households. And we need to address it. It doesn't mean I'm not trying to cause more fights. But the test is this. It lies in discussing with your parents, or the case might be your grandparents, in the first place. I'm not talking about folks that had fertility issues. Duh. I don't want to hear this in the comment box, please. But aside from those folks with medical issues, sit your grandparents or parents down, whoever it is, and say, look, why do I only have one or two siblings? It's a fair question. The Catechism of the Catholic Church from the early 90s suggests it very clearly. A Catholic is owed many siblings. Why is this the test? Because it's the exception that proves the rule. If there's not a love parsimony in our household, if you didn't take a utilitarian approach to having kids in the first place, and you cut out kids or members of the family that become inconvenient, well, then you'll be willing to have this conversation with me, even if it's a humbling one for the many, many boomers or Gen X or even some greatest generation who contracepted. Love parsimony means many Catholics, my age, give or take 5 or 7 years, are privately out of touch with their families of origin. I'll just repeat the point. And they're out of touch with their family without understanding the source or the universality, ubiquity of the crisis. Because a lot of them reach out privately and they're like, my family just can't get along when I got older. The first question I ask, are you from a contraceptive family? Well, I don't know what you mean, Tim. I have one sibling. They didn't contracept all the time. Well, they contracepted pretty much all the time. Your parents. Well, I have 2 siblings. Okay, so there were 3 flukes. 3 soccer balls slipped past the goalie. Maybe they were intentional, but pretty much all the time, that represents, in most cases, using the rule of averages, a contraceptive mindset. A reverse abortion, where your parents, I'm not saying your parents do, but they might look on you and say, this is kind of inconvenient. If you're from one of these families that's incommunicado now, ask yourself this. What if I address this? Now, maybe you have a great conversation and they're humble and they say, look, it was in the water. We were being pressured for mom to get into the workplace, to use technology between 1946 and 1964. That, man, they're just saying it's foolish to not plan your own family, and we just drank the Kool-Aid. We're sorry. We're sorry. We've made up for it, son, and we're sorry. And you say, okay, cool. That's what healing's all about. Learning, etc. But in many cases, I've asked people, oh, you're incommunicado with your parents or your siblings or both? How many siblings do you have? 1, 2. At most 3. Okay, I say this is a contraceptive mindset. Address it. Lovingly, charitably address it, folks. We can't keep arguing with each other unless we're hypocrites. What's the greatest family size, 8 kids or 10 kids? Unless we address the fact that most of us are from households with 2 or 3 kids at the most. Like the WASPs. America has 1.7, 1.8 kids per household. That's not enough. And it represents a fundamental sickness, a parsimony of love, a tightness, a cheapness, a spendthriftiness of love that's coming from the generations down. When you address this with your families, parish orphans and retrogrades, if you're one of the ones I'm talking about, do so lovingly, do so charitably, offer the opportunity over maybe a meal or a cup of coffee to come correct. But we have to address it or else we're fools, okay? So the trads have all these blind spots. We don't want to be arguing over, like Talib Kweli says, who's got the flyest chain on the slave ship. We have generational chains, and they have to be addressed before patriarchy or true familial fruitfulness or even true holiness can emerge. That's, I think, part one of the 3 or 4 reasons why trad communities should be producing better fruit, but are not. We have to address our origin story. Where do we come from? Most of us, even who love the Latin Mass and go to the Latin Mass and argue about, do we have 1 or 2 dozen children at the Latin Mass, come from 1 or 2 or 3 child households. If you don't, then good for you. Have this conversation, have it charitably. Pray to the Holy Spirit for fortitude before you have it. Pray to Mary, the seat of wisdom, before you do it. Pray to the eternal Logos, the second person, Jesus. Pray to Creator God, the first person of the Trinity, before you go have it. But buy your mom or dad a cup of coffee and say, look, I want to talk to you about something. I'm not trying to make you defensive. I'm trying to work out my issues, and we've all got them. But this is a big one, and it's universal enough to be generational. Good luck, parish orders of retrogrades. I strongly suggest you have this conversation. Deus Vult.